Hey, Lane,
Also,
I know you talked to us earlier a couple of times about getting to know players and how difficult that is. COVID has made this. I'm wondering, with guys coming back on campus, are you having conversations with parents? Are there concerns about this restart, and just are you hearing anything along those lines?
um, we have not with the parents. Kind of surprisingly, I thought maybe we would a little bit, um, but I'm assuming that that they trust us and our medical staff, and the plan put in place by the chancellor is very extensive. Um, about how this is just being around the building and the social distancing and everything. So um, we have not had issues with parents with that. So the issue about knowing players, I talked to Elijah Moore Saturday after the walk, and just brought him in here for like an hour, and um, kind of went over some things with him because that is, this situation is not ideal, as we've said before, for first year staff, probably creating more issues than I thought. Um, just from that, in spring ball, I think you get to really know your players. You're on the field with them, you're interacting with them. You put faces with names, and they get to know you, how you can help them on the field, and we've missed all that. So, um, unfortunately, when we were in our meetings, you know, last Monday, talk about all the stuff going on nationally, and just listening to the kids, I realized how little that I know our kids. Um, Especially as a head coach, position coach, you had your meetings where you got to know them and stuff, but so we're behind obviously football wise, but that really hit me how far we're behind relationship wise.
Have you had individual meetings like that with any others? And why was Elijah a good choice for that?
Well, I had before, before we had left with some, and with certain situations, and a lot of times when the coaches go out in spring, now the head coaches are off the road for years now. That's a time really that you're in here that you don't have a lot to do, and you really get a chance to do that, to have some more one-on-one or one-on-three type meetings and stuff like that. So, we really lost a lot of time being able to do that. Elijah, I just picked out because I was walking with him. He had sent me a text actually that morning, that just a text kind of about how excited he was to get back, and um, how much time we missed relationship wise, and some of the players feeling that obviously. So it was good to talk to him, and then just on the theme of listening, which really has been a theme here with all the things going on. This was another example of that.
Lane, you talked a little bit
Which
about
I think, which I note on that, which I think, one of the positive things that have come out of all this in all areas is we're seeing everywhere. Even with Elijah sending the head coach that text, I really feel like it's allowing people in our situation, players, but I bet all around the country, it's allowing people sometimes that feel like maybe I shouldn't say something, even though it's not about these topics. It's just about my feelings in general. Say, hey, it's okay to do that. So I kind of thought that was part of that, and maybe where he maybe wouldn't have sent that text normally with all this stuff going on. It's kind of made people say, okay, made people think, hey, this is what I've wanted to say, but I haven't said it, or I'm not usually feel comfortable saying it.
Go ahead, Nick.
okay. Lane, you mentioned a little bit about just feeling like you got a little bit behind football wise. What were you guys able to install or achieve during these last 3 months before kids did return?
Well, we had done the install meetings in the little time that we're allowed prior to spring ball, but obviously had not done much on the field. We haven't even, there was no time where we're allowed to even have a ball with them. So um, it's one thing to know things mentally, but not be out there to know them physically is very different.
Lane, there's been a lot about strength and conditioning and getting back to normal and that kind of stuff. As far as kids that maybe had surgery in the off season, I mean, is there an update on those guys and kind of what the process was there, and if they're getting close or are 100%?
Yeah, that was difficult. Our training staff did a good job, and a lot of that was just have to, talk kids through rehab through Zooms, instead of being able to physically be there. So I'm sure that, some kids maybe are a little set back because of that. I can't get much information on them because, we're not allowed to work with them yet. So, or even get reports from our strength staff on them.
You'd floated the idea about an OTAs kind of thing a few months back too in July. Now that could potentially be coming up and kind of stuff, like what's the plan? You'd had a plan originally or thought about this before. So for you, when you're trying to imagine getting the kids and having that kind of thing, what's the plan when you do get those OTA type deals?
Well, I don't think it's going to be as much as OTAs. At least I'm reading the thing the proposal that's out there of what they're discussing and what it looks like it may be headed to, and it's talking about, activities with them, but it's just weight training like normal, and really just an added walkthrough. It says for an hour per day, which you could use a football. But again, you're talking about walkthrough is very different than a practice or an OTA day. So doesn't look like what I've been told or what I've seen that there's going to be a real, any more true practices than what there's always been.
Given that there was no spring, Lane, and how things have been kind of condensed, I mean, what does that do to you in choosing a quarterback? How does that change that competition?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't help. Like I've said in all this, we try to be positive, but there's, you got to be, factual also that, that's, that hurt us obviously in evaluation. Now, John probably would have, fallen behind, I'd assume, just off of baseball, and, the amount of time for us to eval and work with him and throwing the ball in the system and stuff. So, in that sense, it probably neutralized it as far as for those two, no one having an advantage.
I know you can't interact too closely with all of the players right now, but just how have they reacted to the new procedures and all of the testing in place? What have you heard from the guys just about how they're reacting to the new normal?
Well, I think that one good thing is, this has been going on for a while. So it's not like all of a sudden you got a social distance. People have been wearing masks for months now and social distancing. And so, at least for me, I feel like it's almost become the norm, not to shake somebody's hand and to stay away from people because we're just kind of used to it now. So I think it probably hasn't been as difficult, as you would think if they hadn't been doing that. Now all of a sudden they got to stay apart, just like our walk the other day, everyone's standing apart, it is a little bit abnormal.
You bring up the walk. Can you just kind of describe your experience doing that and what you kind of heard from the players who were involved in it?
I think it was a great event, a great start of things around campus here with the athletic department of change. Personally, I really like the experience because, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so that was a little bit different. Whenever you're doing something you haven't really done before, I'm talking about the walk itself and the chants there with the players. It was good because that's what a lot of this is about, being, change. And in change, a lot of times it's, getting comfortable being uncomfortable to where it becomes the norm.
Lane, given, you're trying to get to know the players and everything, and then this gets thrown into the mix, the riots and the race question, do you sense that your black players are trusting or are comfortable that Ole Miss is looking for change, that Ole Miss is going to support them in this conversation, or do you sense that there are deeper questions from some of them?
I don't think by any means are they satisfied. I think that, Like I said one time, it's like when we were going through this is like opening day, for baseball, 162 games. Here's just the first game. That's what, it was. So, they're going to want to see change. They're going to wait and see, and, see, was this, just an act of something that was done, for publicity or to check the box, or, are we going to really fall through off of Keith's lead of what he talked about, of this being the beginning?
I know there's a long time to go, Lane, before you get to this point or have to think about this, but do you sense having to in any way maybe tone down the system, the playbook a little bit once the season does start because of all this and the truncated time period in which to install?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think, again, this is first-year staffs versus everyone else. If this, like I said, if this was going on, if I was still at FAU, there would not be a whole lot of concerns, having missed spring and, but, with all the returning players and everything, I really wouldn't be very worried about it. It's like, think how often, people think, well, if you miss spring, man, how can a guy play, if you're a returning player? Well, think about all the time. You got 15, 20 guys out for spring, because of surgeries. And that happens all the time. And guys have great years the next year. Nobody remembers that they missed spring ball, but that's because they were already there. They knew the systems. They had seasons of playing in the systems. So this is much different for first-year staffs. And then there may have to be limits on the playbook.
There obviously wasn't a template coming in for how to recruit during this period. Just kind of how did you come to the philosophy that you and the staff have used to contact players and go after the players the way you have?
Yeah, again, I don't mean to sound negative. I'm just giving you guys, as you'll learn, honest answers. This has been very difficult not to recruit the kids. I think we've done a good job of that. A lot of Zoom, a lot of communication, a lot of new ideas that we've come up with, at the forefront of different thoughts, like the virtual, recruiting where it was like they were on the road. But the issue is the evaluation. The issue is you're taking kids you've never seen, not just, you ain't seen in person, a lot of them, but by now we would have already seen them in spring practice. We would have we'd be going into our camps right now. We're getting to know them as a person. We're getting to see how they perform, how tough they are, all those things. We watch recruiting film every day, and I said, I don't know. How do I decide on this? Because here's a tweener guy that we would normally say this is a camp guy, meaning like we really like him, but we don't want to go all in until we see him in camp. Now we got none of that. So it's a big guessing game. I said yesterday, you imagine the guessing game that's going into it now, what we're having to do? Wait and see how hard it would be if all of a sudden they shut down in the fall and say, all right, we're not going to let people onto our campus. We're not going to do campus visits. We're not going to let you go off campus, to go watch games. Now we're going to be really taking kids that we're going to sign kids that we have never, ever met. It's not very good. You'd never want to do that in your own business. So it's not real good.
With that in mind, do you think that there's going to be any possibility that they consider, at least for 1 year, doing something with the early signing period in December because all of this has gotten pushed back?
I don't know that. I don't think anybody knows that until they figure out, what's going to happen, because nobody can predict Corona. And so, there's been talk about, like we've mentioned, hopefully they give us more evaluation time where we can, put more coaches on the road, on Fridays during the season.
And how confident are you that the season will start on time? Has that, when talking to other coaches, has that confidence level shifted from the last few weeks?
I don't know how confident I am. That changes kind of weekly to me. I sometimes think, it's going to be fine, because our kids are, coming back here and starting to work out. And there's other times I say, I don't know how are we going to play if this is still going on. And, you're going to go into weeks where, hey, all of a sudden that team's down 15 players and 8 DBs because Corona got into the DB room. Now all of a sudden, you got no idea who's playing that week, or sitting for 2 weeks, until they get things more figured out, because now you literally have to DB get it. You may have to sit everyone in that DB room for 2 weeks. How do you play?
As far as you know, do you anticipate all the newcomers being eligible, cleared? Is that all okay?
I do, yes.
Just out of curiosity, how involved are you in the discussions when it comes to planning for how to deal with positive tests and testing and all that stuff? Are you just kind of deferring to the rest of the staff on that, or do you get kind of an input there?
That's all medical. That's, we just get told what to do on those areas. The chancellors have set out a plan, that Shan's implemented here.